Welcome to the world of Aora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello, fellow Kith, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you guys so much for tuning into another episode of looking at the gods of Aora. Today we're going to be talking about Abydon, god of the Forge. Now, for those of you who found your way here by accident, you might be asking, what's this Aora thing you're talking about? Aora is a fantasy setting found in a couple of prominent video games. The two video games, Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, are set in the world of Aora. As well, there is a new video game coming out, hopefully within a couple years, called Avowed. If you're into video games and RPGs, you might have heard of it. It's being developed by Obsidian Entertainment, the same people who made Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. So as the theory goes, if we look into the history, game mechanics, and lore for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, we'll be able to glean some insights as Avowed undergoes development and we all gear up for its release. As well, it gives those of us who love Pillars of Eternity a chance to geek out about this world that we love, as well as just maybe learn something new or reminisce about some parts of the game we already like. So join me as we dive in to talk about God of the Forge, Abydon.
I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
As I've mentioned, Abydon is referred to as God of the Forge, but that would be doing him a disservice because he is more than God of just welding or the forge or blacksmithing. He is deity over skilled labor in general. In fact, let me just give you the domains that are listed on the Pillars of Eternity Wikipedia. Abydon is deity over industry, machines, golems, smiths, skilled trades, apprenticeship, strength, mining and metals, hope, and aspiration. And as well, at one point, he was also the deity of preservation. However, before these current domains, he actually used to hold other domains in his purview as well. In fact, he was devoted to duty, preservation, progress, and industry. But there's a little piece of Abydon's history that we'll go over later that has to do with him changing his portfolio of domains. Now, Abydon goes by a few names. One is the Iron Arm, another is the Golem, and lastly, the Smith of Magran. Magran is the goddess of fire and war, and it doesn't take much to realize why Abydon and Magran go together very well. Magran being the deity of fire and war being fought with things like swords and shields, and weapons that need to be made in a forge. And so it makes sense that Abydon, god of the forge, would align well with Magran, goddess of war. That is a lot of the reason for those two linking together, at least on an idealistic level. Now, as I've touched on in talking about the deities, the domains that the deities are in charge of are not so much like assigned roles or duties, like, this is your job, you're the deity of industry, this is your job, you're the deity of the ocean, and then they just have to oversee it because it's a form of duty. It's a natural expression of their nature, of who they are. And a lot of times we have some of these conceptual, abstract domains being mixed with practical domains. An example with Abydon is he is the god of hope and aspiration. Those are both very conceptual in nature, but he's also the deity of smithing and machines, which are very real, empirical, practical things. And so what's going on here? The reason for a lot of this, at least by my theory, this is a little bit speculative, is that there are practical things that you either do in the world or things that exist in the world of Aora that are excellent metaphors or active metaphors, in a sense, for these other conceptual ideas. And so blacksmithing and skilled trades and apprenticeships and machines, these things embody through a vivid imagery the nature of Abydon. It's almost like they're a metaphorical expression of the ideals that he represents. And here's an example of what I mean. The idea of hope and then the other domain of apprenticeship. What do those two have in common? Well, hope is looking forward to something in the future, most likely, that will be better than it is now, or something that you're hoping to achieve. I used hope in its own definition. It's something that you're looking forward to achieving or getting to. Apprenticeship is a form of that, because you starting off somewhere at an entry level in some form of skilled work. And being under the tutelage of a master, you learn how to do the job well in the hopes that you will eventually be able to do it yourself, perhaps pass it on to another person or start your own business with that, right? And so apprenticeship is like an active metaphor for hope. And it's the unique mingling of these different domains that give you the vivid picture of what Abydon is and what he represents by being the deity that he is, because all the deities represent different ideals. Now, we could be staring at these different list of domains and be left guessing of like, what is it that Abydon actually values? What does he want people to live by? What's his view on the world? But luckily enough, at least if you're interested in Abydon like I am, there's actually a book in Pillars of Eternity 1 called Daily Affirmations of Focus and Efficiency. And that book is considered the scripture, if you will, of Abydon worshippers. It contains 9 tenets or 9 affirmations of daily practices. And these practices are what Abydon worshippers or Abydon followers aim to be like. And so we're going to go through those right now and get a good idea of what it is Abydon values. Reading directly from the book, Daily Affirmations of Focus and Efficiency, the lore scripture for the god Abydon. Affirmation number 1. All errors can be reforged into lessons. Abydon rebuilt himself from ruin. No setback is insurmountable, not even death itself, so long as the soul is dedicated to the task. We're going to see that motif at the beginning of this affirmation repeated quite a lot. The one here that states all errors can be reforged into lessons. We're going to see the all blank can be reforged into blank motif quite a lot. And this idea that your errors can be reforged into lessons, it's a value that if you made a mistake in something, it doesn't have to end just there. It doesn't have to just be the end of the world or an entirely net loss type of thing. You can take something negative that's happened and reforge it into something good, like a lesson. So if you've made a mistake, learn from that mistake. There's no point in letting a mistake be as negative as it is. Add a little bit of positivity to it. Lower that net loss. And they use Abydon rebuilding himself as an example for this, because in the history, Abydon's physical manifestation was destroyed, theoretically, by one of the other gods. And that's something we'll get into later, and that's not a bit spoiler because it's directly from the Collector's Book of Pillars of Eternity. But there is something later on where we learn the truth behind it, and that'll come near the end of the episode. The second affirmation, work hard, work well. Abydon demands only honest labor and forthright service. All errors can be reforged if your first intentions are pure. And so there we see again that regular motif. All blank can be reforged into blank. This one says all errors can be reforged if your first intentions are pure. So the previous affirmation was all errors can be reforged into lessons. This one is all errors can be reforged if your first intentions are pure. So we're still talking about errors. And I think that that's going to be a common trope in these affirmations, is looking at errors and how you can turn these around to be something good. In this case, it's talking about if you have an error or a mistake, but it started with good intentions, that it would be easier to reforge them. It'll be easier to make up for them. And this just makes sense if you think about it. Like, if you were doing something and from the get-go you were intending on being deceptive or lying to someone about it, if you got found out or if you made a mistake, then you have to maintain that lie and then come up with other lies to cover it up. Or you have to convince the person that despite the fact that you were being deceptive, that they should still trust you and what you were trying to do. If your intentions are pure, you don't have to hold up lies. You don't have to try to convince people to still trust you. You can more easily make up for the error. It removes roadblocks. And so this idea of working hard and working well mixes well with honest labor, because if you do dishonest labor, then you're going to put a lot of hard work into just keeping up the lie instead of putting the hard work into the thing you're actually trying to produce, which is what Abydon would probably care about more. Affirmation number 3. All ignorance can be reforged into knowledge. Master your craft. Excel at what you have been trusted to do. Do not offend your teacher by remaining a student forever. This is a really good one. I like this one a lot. This is a contender for being one of my favorites, actually. It follows the same motif. All ignorance can be reforged into knowledge. So I think that follows the idea of if you have something that you don't have knowledge about, you can pursue it. Anything that you are ignorant to, you can become not ignorant to. You can essentially grow. And this whole affirmation is about growth. After it says all ignorance can be reforged into knowledge, it says master your craft. Excel at what you have been trusted to do. Do not offend your teacher by remaining a student forever. And that last line there about remaining a student forever, I think is the key to seeing that this is about growth, because it's not about just staying at your apprenticeship level. It's about growing in your skills so that eventually you can be more than a student. If you remain a student forever, in a sense, it would be an offense to your teacher because it would indicate that they're not a very good teacher. But maybe it's not always the teacher's fault. Sometimes it might be the attitude of a student not wanting to move beyond that. And so growth, I think, would be something valued by Abydon. Affirmation number 4, each generation must forge its successors. Teach your trade to all who are willing to learn, and in doing so, multiply the fruits of your knowledge. And this to me just makes a logical sense. I mean, this is one of the ideas that science is founded upon. If you are a scientist in a lab working on something, you're very likely working off of the hard work of scientists before you from things that they have learned. And those scientists were performing experiments to learn new things based off of information previous generations of scientists have worked on. Look at our computing power. The technology of before has led people to developing new technologies. You know what? Let's just look at video games. Because, obviously we all like video games. You're listening to this podcast about one, for goodness sake. You guys like video games, but it took work from people not generations ago, I guess decades ago, to learn how to even make this stuff, to learn how to even take something to produce it on a television screen that you could control, and from that early stages being built upon the work of previous people, you have what you have now. Things like Avowed being undergoing development. And so this idea that each generation must forge its successors, that word must seems very important, is that in order for something to continue, you need to create the next generation that will continue it on, because if not, it'll just die with you. Affirmation number 5, all difficulties can be reforged into triumphs. Meet strife with humility and acceptance. Let adversity temper the ingot of your will, and you will never shatter. Here we go, following the motif, all difficulties can be reforged into triumphs. The idea that if you have setbacks, if you have hardships, you have difficulties, you can take those sufferings, if you will, and you can turn them into triumphs. You can turn them into something good. So you might be undergoing some form of suffering for whatever reason. And rather than that just being holistically negative, nothing good about it, you can take something from that and make a good thing out of it. This is kind of like affirmation number 1, where it says all errors can be reforged into lessons. You're taking something negative and you're taking something good out of it. The last line in this affirmation here, it requires a little bit of breaking down. Let adversity temper the ingot of your will, and you will never shatter. If you read that slowly, like I had to, because sometimes my brain is a little slower, what it seems to be saying is that, like, if you let adversity, or things that are making you suffer, temper the ingot of your will. Tempering, if I understand it correctly, was heating the metal so that you could manipulate it and move it and shape it into something else. I'm not a blacksmith, so hopefully I'm getting that right. But it seems that suffering allows the quote-unquote ingot of your will to be manipulated and turned into something else. It's almost like suffering for something makes you that more dedicated to doing something, because it's about your will, your volition, what you are trying to go for. And that kind of makes sense, actually, if you think about it, because if you are pursuing some sort of dream or goal and you encounter a little bit of hardships and you stop right there, well, you obviously didn't value that goal very much. It obviously wasn't that important that you would push through the hardship. But if you do push through the hardship, then that indicates something. That indicates just how important it is to you. This goal is important enough that you are willing to go through hardship X. So it's at least that important to you. And even more, it actually would bolster your resolve to make sure you reach that goal, right? Because, well, if you suffered hardships trying to get to this place, then you don't want that to be in vain, right? Like, oh man, I suffered a financial loss trying to go for this certificate. I better make sure I do this now. Otherwise, that financial loss will be in vain. It will have been for nothing. So yeah, I could see that. Adversity tempering the ingot of your will, I guess, to use creative imagery there. Affirmation number 6. Embrace your station Fulfill the duties of your rank and meddle not in the affairs of your betters. All guilds fail at their weakest link. There's something about my cultural brainwashing that's raising red flags for this one for me, and I'm not really 100% sure why. That first statement, embrace your station, I think was something I wanted to push back against, but I'll give it benefit of the doubt. So embracing your station is, I would imagine, having to be something about, if you're working in this place, embrace that you're working there. And it almost sounds like it's saying to just be content with where you're at, which I think is a good thing, but it would directly go against one of the other affirmations if it meant that you were never supposed to proceed beyond it, If you were to embrace your station and never move past that station, that wouldn't be growth. And one of the previous affirmations were talking about how growth is a good thing. So I don't think that's necessarily what it means. What I think it does mean is that by embracing the station you're in, you're adding value to the work that you're in, and you're recognizing that I'm working here and other people are working in other places. Let them do their work while I'm going to do my work well. So fulfill the duties of your rank and meddle not in the affairs of your betters. I suppose that means you need to trust your employers. I could see governments and dictators using an affirmation like this as propaganda to really oppress people. I could see people using it for a good thing, right? I could see a dictator using this affirmation to make you identify as a cog in a machine and therefore just try to get you to do your job so that their machine can keep doing whatever it is that they've designed it to do, which at first sounds like a very negative kind of imagery, that you're just a gear in some machine. But in a way, it also adds a lot of value, because if you had this giant machine that's doing some huge job, something really important, let's say, and you're just this tiny little gear in there, seemingly insignificant, but you take that one little gear out, all of a sudden the whole machine stops. It's like that little gear, even though it was seemingly unimportant and, comparatively in terms of value, it cost less than maybe the rest of the parts. Without that tiny little gear, the whole machine falls apart. This complex thing that's meant to do this wondrous piece of work doesn't work without even the smallest gear in it turning with the rest of them. So in a way, it adds value to the work that you would be doing in something like that. Sorry, I went off tangent. I'm the only person here. There's no one policing me, so this is going to get a little bit philosophical every now and then. I'll move back on. Affirmation number 7. All loss can be reforged into strength. Profitable work heals all emptiness. So long as you have the tools of your trade, you will always be able to forge new wealth. Here again, we're following that motif. All loss can be reforged into strength. It's interesting. A lot of these things where it says all blank can be reforged into blank, it's like you're saying all of a negative thing can be reforged into the contrapositive of that, right? So errors into lessons, ignorance into knowledge, and in this one, loss into strength. Profitable work heals all emptiness. So long as you have the tools of your trade, you will always be able to forge wealth anew. I really resonate with that profitable work heals all emptiness part. Just like many people, on Monday mornings, I wake up sometimes pretty dreary, like, okay, got to go to work for another week. It's all good. And I love my job, which is a blessing. A lot of people aren't able to say that. But, still Monday mornings roll by and I, peel myself out of bed and find a way to get to work. But despite that, a lot of times at the end of a really good day of work, I have this sense of satisfaction, this sense of a little bit more full than when I left in the morning, I think that's what the writers at Obsidian were probably leaning on. I think that's the feeling that they were hoping to capture when they wrote this piece of lore in the book. Affirmation number 8. Value the works of others, and they will value your works in return. Share the harvest with the hungry and your tools with the destitute. I love this one. I love this one through and through. It's absolutely great. Value the works of others, and they will value your works in return. A lot of us know this is true firsthand. If you add value to someone else, it's almost natural for them to add value back. A good example, actually, is my friend Sora, who is in charge of the Avowedcast podcast, which some of you may have heard. If you haven't heard of it, go look it up. It's a podcast dedicated to the Avowed world and RPG stuff. He gets a bunch of us together and we talk about RPGs in general, but we discuss Pillars of Eternity and Avowed in particular. Anyways, I'm not going to do a whole thing on it yet. He can come up with his own ad. I'll throw it in here somewhere. But I don't remember if it was him that reached out to me or the other way around, but we reached out to each other and we were really like, hey, I love the work that you're doing. It's super awesome. How can I be a part of it? And us adding value to each other's work motivated us, and it kept us connected. And I think it made us work better, really. I'm not saying it made him work more or me work more, but I think it made the work better. It made it more fulfilling. We had connection over that. Now, this affirmation is probably doing with more than just saying compliment your peers, go look at your fellow content creators and tell them they're doing a good job. Because the last half of it says, share the harvest with the hungry and your tools with the destitute. And so this seems to be about being generous, generosity, giving to the poor in a sense. Is share the harvest with the hungry. So harvest, food, sharing it with people that don't have it, and sharing your tools, which would have cost you money, with the destitute, people that don't have money to buy tools. Right? So sharing these things with others so that they will also be able to work. You're adding value to their work by giving them the things that they can use to do work. And then lastly, affirmation number 9. All souls can be reforged into whatever we will. Hard work is not exclusive to life. Death is no time for complacency. Commit yourself to excellence in this cycle and the next. A bit of background for this one. This cycle that this affirmation is referring to is called the wheel. It is a cycle of rebirth. It's essentially reincarnation. And the world of Aora runs on a metaphysical cycle of reincarnation. A Kith person will die, their soul will leave their body, spend time in the afterlife, the capital B beyond, where the gods are, and eventually return back to the physical world of Aora again, entering into a new body to form new experiences and memories. And that is the cycle that this affirmation is referring to. And the thing that I pull out of affirmation number 9 is that you can't think of all of this reforging stuff in just terms of physicalness. You can't think of it just in the mundane sense. A lot of us will have already caught on reading these 9 values, or I guess the 8 values, but a lot of this is also talking about, the spirit, the lowercase s spirit. It's not just talking about all, of affirmation number 7, all loss can be reforged into strength. It's not talking about just physical loss being reforged into some form of physical strength. It can also be emotional or spiritual as well. And that's what number 9 for me is really speaking to. It's really tying the previous 8 together, and it's giving it a fresh perspective of not just from a mundane perspective, and that it doesn't end just at when you die, because again, the world runs on a cycle of reincarnation. And so those are the 9 daily affirmations of focus and efficiency. The book from Pillars of Eternity 1 that is essentially a scripture for followers of Abydon. I've mentioned this before. There's a game mechanic in Pillars of Eternity called disposition. That's capital D, disposition. Essentially what this game mechanic is it is a way to quantifiably measure role-playing in a video game, which personally I love. I hope Obsidian does something like this for Avowed, where they take the role-playing aspect of the game and they somehow add a value to it, where you can actually build your character and role-play them quantifiably. So how this will work is that if you're making a character who is deceptive, you're role-playing as a deceptive person. When you make deceptive choices in the game, your deception rank increases. Now, it doesn't help you level up, like you don't gain levels and gain new abilities and talents because of it, but it increases your deception rank. So you become more well-known as a person who lies, which would be useful if you're trying to become part of a criminal organization. And it also gives you more opportunities. If you are a deceptive person, it lets you note these opportunities when you can use that in dialogue. And so that, I think, is a really good role-playing mechanic. One way that Obsidian introduces this role-playing mechanic into the game, especially if you're playing a priest or a paladin, is that if you are following a deity as a faithful worshiper of that deity, you are sort of beholden to behave the way that deity wants you to behave. And if you don't, there are negative setbacks to that. So a good example is that if you are a priest of Barath, which is a playable subclass in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, Barath favors stoicism and rationality as her favored dispositions. And so when you're role-playing your character in the game, if you make stoic choices and rational choices, then your priestly abilities will actually increase. You'll actually get stronger in some of your priestly abilities. I've talked about this before, so I'm sorry if I'm going into it again. The thing about Abydon is we don't actually know what his dispositions are. So there is no priest of Abydon that you can play in the game. And so we don't actually know what dispositions Abydon would want. But just looking at these affirmations from this book we just read, I'm willing to wager that the two dispositions that Abydon favors is honesty and passion. And my reason being is that multiple times he talks about doing an honest day's work or doing hard, honest labor. And so the frequency of that word honest just makes me think that he would value honesty. And the reason I say passion is because he's talking about mastering your craft and, forging things in a blacksmith shop. Now, he's not talking about it here, but that would be a piece of imagery associated with him. And that kind of thing I don't think happens without a little bit of passion in your life. Just like the fires in a blacksmith forge, there's got to be a fire in your heart to pursue all this. And so that's my argument for those two being his favorite dispositions. Now, as for the two things that Abydon would condemn, I'm going to say deception and cruelty. Cruelty because he talks about valuing the works of others, sharing the harvest with the hungry and giving your tools to the destitute. That sounds very opposite of cruelty, and so I think he would be opposed to cruelty. And deception just makes sense with him favoring honesty, then he would obviously condemn dishonesty. So that's my opinion. For those of you familiar with the disposition mechanic in Pillars of Eternity, what do you think the two favored dispositions would be of Abydon, and what do you think the two condemned dispositions would be? For those wanting to know a little bit more, I'll list the dispositions here for you right now. Here are the 10 dispositions you have to choose from: aggression, benevolence, cleverness, cruelty, deception, diplomacy, honesty, passion, rationality, and stoicism. Out of those 10, what two do you think he would like, and what two do you think Abydon would not like, based off of the affirmations that we read not too long ago? But that's all we're going to talk about today for Abydon. We actually spent a lot of time in that one book. Tune in with me in the next episode. We're going to take another look at Abydon, finish off talking about his personality and what people might be like that follow him, as well as discuss some philosophy behind him. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode. I've been really enjoying this with you guys, and if you want to reach out to me for a comment, question, concern, criticism, or just a shout out, then please do. My doors are always open, and I'm always looking to have a good conversation with people or get some feedback. You can reach me by email at worldofaora@gmail.com, or alternatively, you can reach me on Twitter at worldofaora. Thank you so much, guys. I am looking forward to doing the next episode with you, and I'll see you next time.